It was February 1st, 2025. The snow crunched beneath Marissa Lee's boots as she pushed herself forward, her breath coming in heavy clouds that dissolved into the freezing Wyoming air. The trail was steep, winding through towering pines blanketed in fresh snow, the weight of winter pressing down on the world around her. Marissa had set out before sunrise, determined to prove to herself that she could do this, one step at a time, one challenge after another. January had seemed endless, but February was finally the time for Marissa to show that she was stronger than anyone, herself included, believed. This mountain had been in her dreams for months, a symbol of everything she had fought to reclaim: strength, freedom, herself. Her body ached, but she felt the pain was proof that she was still alive, still fighting. At 352 pounds, every step was difficult, but she had trained for this. She had walked miles through city streets, then rural roads, then uneven trails leading into the wilderness. This was the final test. The summit was close now, just beyond the ridge. The thought of standing at the top, looking out over the vast expanse of snow-covered wilderness, made her heart swell with anticipation. She had made it this far. She was certain she would finish. But she was wrong. The world around her was silent, save for the sound of wind through the trees. But then, something shifted. A low, deep rumble, so different from the whispering wind. Something was there, watching her. Marissa stopped, her heart hammering in her chest. The sound came again, heavier this time, vibrating through the earth beneath her feet. A shadow moved in the trees ahead, slow as if time meant nothing. At first, it was just a shape, massive and indistinct, blending into the dark trunks. Then it stepped forward, and Marissa's heart skipped a beat. She felt her stomach drop in terror, just as the grizzly raised its head to stare into her eyes. The animal was huge, its thick fur matted with remnants of frost, its breath steaming in the cold air. The beast had awakened too early, dragged from hibernation before the world was ready to welcome it. It had not eaten in months, its body still sluggish from winter's deep sleep. Hunger gnawed at its ribs. And now, here stood Marissa, an easy prey. She was slow, she was weak, she was helpless. Her pulse spiked, her mind screaming at her to move. But she didn't. Not because she didn't want to, but because she couldn't. Every survival lesson she had read ran through her head in chaotic bursts. Don't run. Don't make eye contact. Make yourself big. But none of it mattered now. Marissa knew her chances of survival were incredibly slim. The bear huffed, its nose twitching, black eyes locking onto her. A second passed, then another, and then it lunged. The ground shifted as Marissa turned to run, but she wasn't fast enough. The bear crashed into her from behind, a force like an avalanche, sending her sprawling face first into the snow. Pain exploded in her ribs, her back, her skull. A sharp gasp tore from her throat, but the weight was gone as quickly as it came. She rolled onto her back, chest heaving, vision swimming. The bear loomed above her, steam rising from its nostrils, its lips curling back to reveal yellowed teeth, each one longer than her fingers and sharper than she'd ever imagined. The animal moved again, swiping at her leg. Its claws tore through her calf, slicing deep into muscle. Marissa screamed, twisting and trying to crawl backward, but the snow was too thick, her body too heavy. The bear roared and then struck again. The claws raked across her shoulder, tearing through jacket, flesh, and sinew. Her body jerked violently, and her vision blurred from the pain. She clawed at the ground, at the ice, at anything to pull herself away. But the beast was relentless. It wasn't a quick, efficient kill. It was desperate, messy, driven by starvation and confusion. Marissa felt herself being dragged. The bear's teeth sank into her arm, its strength overwhelming as it lifted her and shook her. The pain was unbearable, a white-hot burst of fire spreading through her body. Her vision darkened, but she forced herself to stay conscious. She had to. If she passed out now, she wouldn't wake up again. The world tilted as the bear released her, dropping her into the snow like discarded prey. Blood pooled beneath her, staining the white ground in stark contrast. Marissa's breaths were ragged and shallow. Movement sent agony through every nerve in her body, but she forced herself to shift, to reach for the one thing she could still control: her phone. Her fingers trembled as she pulled it from her jacket pocket, her vision blurring as she swiped at the screen. The pain was unbearable, but she pushed through it, blinking through tears in the haze of encroaching darkness. The bear wasn't done. It paced nearby, sniffing, circling, watching her. It wasn't sure if she was still a threat, if she could still fight. She had seconds, maybe less. She knew there was nothing she could do to save herself now, but there were others she could help. Friends and family she could spare the agony of wondering about her last moments on Earth. Her thumbs moved instinctively. The screen was smeared with blood, her movements sluggish. Her breathing was shallow, each inhale a fight against the crushing weight of pain. She couldn't make a call, no service. The text would have to do. She focused, her fingers shaking as she typed. Just as she hit send, the bear growled, a rumbling sound that made her entire body go rigid. Its head lowered. It was coming back. She didn't have time to feel fear anymore, just regret. Regret that she wouldn't see her family again, that she had fought so hard for so long, only for it to end like this. But at least she had tried. That had to mean something. The last thing she felt was the bear's weight pressing down, jaws closing around her neck. Then, nothing. Hours passed before the search team arrived, their boots crunching through the snow as they followed the GPS coordinates her phone had last transmitted. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows through the trees. The wind carried nothing but silence. The first rescuer to reach the site stopped cold, his breath hitching in his throat. Snow was disturbed in violent patterns, streaked with blood now frozen solid. There were claw marks on the surrounding trees, deep and fresh, and in the center of it all, partially buried in crimson-stained snow, lay Marissa Lee. Her body was still, her expression frozen in a final moment of pain and determination. Her phone rested just inches from her hand. They checked the phone and found her last message. The weight of it settled over the team, pressing down like the cold around them. They had come too late, and somewhere not far away, a grizzly bear, still restless from its early waking, moved through the trees, leaving behind only the remnants of a battle fought between hunger and survival. A battle Marissa had never truly stood a chance of winning. On August 12, 2023, David and Laura Johnson and their two children, 10-year-old Emily and 8-year-old Ryan, arrived in a national park in Alberta's Rocky Mountains, Canada, for a camping weekend. David, a 39-year-old software engineer from Calgary, loved nature. Laura, a 37-year-old schoolteacher, enjoyed hiking and cooking meals outdoors. Their children, Emily and Ryan, were excited about fishing in nearby lakes and exploring forest trails. The national park, famous for its beauty and wildlife, had recently posted warnings about more bear sightings near campgrounds. Rangers recommended storing food in special bear-proof containers, but David, busy unpacking their gear, ignored the advice and left their food in a cooler beside their tent. The first day passed happily, filled with fishing, hiking, and roasting marshmallows by their campfire. After dinner, the family climbed into their tent, tired and ready for sleep. Emily hugged her favorite stuffed animal while Ryan drifted off quickly beside his mother. Late that night, at about 3 a.m., the peaceful silence of the campground broke suddenly. The family woke instantly, hearing loud, heavy breathing outside their tent. David reached quietly for a knife he had packed, holding it tightly. Before they could move, the enormous grizzly bear slashed through the tent with powerful claws, tearing a huge hole in the fabric. The bear's massive jaws closed around David's shoulder, biting deeply. David tried to fight back with his knife, but the bear's strength overwhelmed him, and he was killed instantly, his body falling limp. Laura screamed, desperately pulling Ryan behind her, shielding him with her own body. The bear turned quickly, biting and clawing fiercely. Laura was badly mauled, deep claw marks covering her back and arms. Ryan, protected by his mother, cried out as the bear's claws dug into his side, causing severe injuries. Emily, thrown aside in the chaos, lay completely still beneath her father's body. Terrified, she stayed quiet, listening helplessly to her family's suffering. The bear continued to circle the torn tent, sniffing loudly, searching for more food. Other campers nearby woke from the terrifying screams echoing through the night. They quickly called for help, contacting park rangers for assistance. The forest had turned from a peaceful retreat into a nightmare filled with fear, confusion, and pain. The bear lingered nearby as Emily lay silently under her father, still hungry and dangerous. The night was far from over, and Emily knew she had to remain perfectly still, waiting desperately for rescue, hoping the bear would soon leave. Emily remained frozen under her father's heavy body, her heart pounding. The grizzly bear circled the damaged tent, sniffing and growling loudly. Emily held her breath, too afraid to move or cry. Moments later, park rangers arrived, flashlights shining into the darkness. Seeing the bear close to the tent, the rangers quickly raised their rifles and fired. The bear fell immediately, silent and still. Rangers carefully approached the tent, shining their lights inside. They found David's lifeless body first, covered in deep bite marks and injuries. Underneath him, Emily was discovered alive, shaking with fear but physically unharmed. Laura lay nearby, badly wounded and barely breathing. Her arms and back had deep, painful claw marks, and she was bleeding heavily. Next to her, Ryan was severely injured, suffering from large wounds across his side and back. Rangers quickly carried Laura and Ryan out, rushing them to waiting ambulances. Emily was taken gently by another ranger, wrapped in blankets, and driven to a nearby hospital for observation. Doctors at the hospital worked urgently on Laura and Ryan, trying desperately to save them. Despite their best efforts, Laura and Ryan's injuries were too severe. Both passed away within hours. Emily, now alone, sat quietly in the hospital room, too stunned to understand fully what had happened. The attack soon made national headlines, shocking people across Canada. Investigators quickly found the family's improperly stored food near their tent. Experts explained that leaving food out had attracted the bear, causing the deadly attack. This sparked fierce debates about the need for stronger campground rules. Emily went to live with her grandparents in Calgary. She struggled deeply with sadness, missing her family every day. Her grandparents tried their best to comfort her, but the terrible memory of that night never left her mind. The national park officials soon changed camping rules, making bear-proof food storage containers mandatory. New signs clearly warned campers about storing food safely. Rangers also increased patrols, closely checking campsites each night. Visitors to the park became more cautious, aware that nature could be beautiful and dangerous. Many spoke quietly about the Johnson family's tragedy, reminding each other to respect wildlife and follow safety rules. As months passed, Emily slowly began healing, supported by counselors and her grandparents. She eventually visited the campsite where the attack had occurred, leaving flowers near a small memorial honoring her parents and brother. Life in the national park continued quietly, its forests and mountains unchanged. But for Emily, everything had changed. Her story became a powerful reminder across Canada about respecting wildlife and staying safe. The peaceful mountains of the national park held beautiful views, but hidden within their beauty was the memory of a tragic night. A family's happy camping trip turned deadly, leaving behind a young girl forever changed and a community determined to prevent another heartbreaking loss. October 2023. The cold winds of the Kodiak Islands swept through the dense forests. Eric Hall was an experienced hunter who had spent years tracking animals in the wild. He knew the dangers of hunting in remote areas, but his love for the outdoors always brought him back. Born and raised in Alaska, he had grown up learning survival skills from his father. Hunting was more than just a pastime for him. It was a way of life. On this particular day, Eric set out early in the morning carrying his rifle and gear. He had planned to hunt deer but knew the area was home to much larger animals. Kodiak bears, the largest brown bears in the world, roamed these forests. He had encountered them before, but had always managed to keep a safe distance. This time, things would be different. As the sun set, Eric climbed into a tree stand, hoping to spot a target before returning to camp. A rustling sound in the distance broke the stillness of the forest. He focused his eyes and saw a massive Kodiak bear moving through the trees. Its thick fur glowed under the fading sunlight, and its powerful frame sent a chill down his spine. Eric carefully lifted his rifle, steadying his breath. He knew that he had to make the shot count if he fired. His finger pressed against the trigger, and the sound of the gunshot echoed through the forest. The bullet missed its mark, and in an instant, the bear's behavior changed. Its ears flattened, and its deep, rumbling growl filled the air. The missed shot had turned the hunter into prey. The bear charged incredibly fast, covering the distance between them in seconds. Eric tried to reload, but there was no time. The bear reached the tree's base and lunged, shaking the stand violently. Eric lost his balance and fell, landing hard on the forest floor. Before he could react, the bear swiped at his chest, its sharp claws tearing through his jacket and cutting into his skin. Pain shot through his body, but he knew he had to fight. He scrambled backward, reaching for his rifle, but the bear was faster. Its massive paw pinned him down, and its powerful jaws clamped onto his leg, sending another wave of pain through him. His vision blurred, and his breaths came in short gasps. Desperate to survive, Eric grasped the ground, searching for anything he could use. His fingers closed around a sharp stick, which he drove into the bear's eye with every ounce of strength. The animal let out a deep roar, momentarily stunned. It shook its head wildly, then turned and retreated into the forest. Eric was left alone, severely injured and struggling to breathe. He knew he had to get to safety before he lost too much blood. He crawled toward his camp with no other choice, hoping to make it before it was too late. Eric's body ached with every movement as he dragged himself through the forest. The deep wounds on his chest burned with each breath, and his injured leg throbbed with unbearable pain. Blood soaked his torn clothing, leaving a trail behind him as he struggled to move forward. The cold wind cut through the trees, making his body tremble. He knew he might not have survived the night if he had stopped now. The journey back to his camp felt endless. Every few feet he had to pause to catch his breath. His arms grew weaker, and his vision blurred. He tried to listen for any sounds, fearing the wounded bear might return. The forest was silent except for the rustling leaves and his heavy breathing. The night was closing in, and darkness made everything around him harder to see. After hours, he finally spotted the small clearing where his camp was set up. Relief washed over him, but his strength was nearly gone. He pulled himself toward his tent with the last bit of energy left. His supplies were just a few feet away, but his body refused to move any further. His hands shook as he reached for his emergency satellite phone. The next thing he remembered was the distant sound of an approaching helicopter. The rescue team had received his distress signal and were searching for him. Bright lights shone through the darkness, and voices called out his name. He tried to respond, but his voice was weak. Moments later, strong hands lifted him onto a stretcher. He felt the warmth of blankets around him, but the pain in his body was overwhelming. At the hospital, doctors worked quickly to treat his injuries. Deep claw marks covered his chest, and his leg had severe bite wounds. The medical team cleaned and stitched the cuts while giving him fluids to regain strength. Days passed before he was stable enough to talk about what had happened. The attack had left both physical and emotional scars that would never fully heal. News of the incident spread quickly. Other hunters and locals in the Kodiak Islands were reminded of the dangers of entering the wilderness. Many who had known Eric were shocked that an experienced hunter like him had come so close to losing his life. Experts studied the attack and warned others about the unpredictable nature of these large predators. For Eric, the experience was nothing short of life-altering. He had spent years navigating the wild, finding solace in its untamed beauty. But now, the thought of returning filled him with an unsettling dread. The image of the bear, its sheer power, the primal force behind its charge, was seared into his mind, playing repeatedly like a nightmare that refused to fade. Even in sleep, he couldn't escape it. He knew he was lucky. Miraculously, he had survived, but the razor-thin margin between life and death was something he couldn't ignore. It wasn't just a close call, but a moment that redefined his relationship with the wilderness. Once a source of comfort, the towering trees now felt like looming sentinels, whispering reminders of what had nearly happened. The forest, which had always been his refuge, would never feel the same again. The wind howled through the towering pines of the wilderness of Alaska, carrying with it the sharp bite of midwinter cold. Snow blanketed the vast wilderness, stretching endlessly in every direction, broken only by the skeletal remains of bare branches and the jagged peaks looming in the distance. The land was silent, but for the occasional rustling of unseen creatures, their movements hidden beneath the heavy weight of the season. It was in this unforgiving expanse that 3 Alaska State Police officers, Sergeant Rachel Adams, Officer Thomas Davis, and Officer Jessica Lee, found themselves on February 10th, 2025. The trio had been assigned to patrol the area after reports of an increase in bear activity. Sightings had become more frequent, with some locals claiming that an aggressive grizzly had been roaming too close to human settlements. In the bitter cold, food was scarce, and a starving bear was a dangerous one. Though the officers carried rifles for protection, their primary objective was investigation. They were looking for tracks, signs of hunters operating outside legal limits, and any indication that a bear had ventured too far beyond its natural hunting grounds. Their patrol vehicle sat parked just off a narrow, icy road nestled between the trees. It had been left there as they ventured deeper into the woods, following a set of tracks that could have belonged to either a poacher or an animal. The officers, bundled in thick winter gear, moved cautiously, each step crunching softly in the snow. What they did not know was that while they were following their trail, something found them. A grizzly, its ribs pressing against its thick hide, had picked up the scent of food. The officers had brought snacks, protein bars, some leftover sandwiches, nothing substantial, but enough to attract a starving animal. The bear, driven by hunger, followed the scent, its massive paws pressing deep into the snow. It had no fear of humans. In fact, it had encountered them before. It had learned that food could be found in their presence, though it had never been bold enough to approach directly. Until now. By the time Rachel, Thomas, and Jessica returned to their vehicle, the bear was already inside. The windows had been shattered, the door bent outward from the sheer force of the animal's weight. The inside was in ruins, wrappers shredded, seats torn apart. The scent of food was replaced by the thick, musky odor of wet fur and raw desperation. Then the snow moved. A blur of muscle and rage lunged from the wreckage. Before any of them could react, the bear was on Officer Thomas. A sickening crack split the air as the bear's weight drove him down, its massive jaws clamping onto his shoulder. He barely had time to cry out before he was wrenched backward, his body dragged through the snow as his boots kicked helplessly. His rifle, slung across his chest, was trapped beneath him, useless as the bear yanked him toward the trees. Rachel and Jessica barely had time to process what had happened before instinct took over. Their hands went for their weapons, but panic made everything slower. Rachel fumbled with the strap of her rifle, her gloves stiff from the cold. Jessica managed to unholster her sidearm, raising it just as the bear let out a deep guttural roar, one that vibrated in the very marrow of their bones. Thomas was still alive, but barely. His face was twisted in agony, blood staining the pristine snow beneath him. The bear's claws raked down his side, tearing through his thick jacket as though it were paper. His breaths came in short gasps, his body convulsing as he fought against the inevitable. Rachel fired first. The shot rang out across the empty wilderness, the sound swallowed almost instantly by the vastness of the land. The bullet struck the bear's side, but it barely seemed to notice. Adrenaline and hunger drove it forward. It released Thomas, turning on Rachel now, charging with terrifying speed. She tried to fire again, but the bear was too fast. It barreled into her, knocking the rifle from her grasp, sending her sprawling onto the ice-hard ground. Claws raked across her leg, shredding fabric and flesh alike. Pain exploded through her body, but she had no time to react before the bear's massive jaws snapped inches from her face. Jessica fired repeatedly, her shots slamming into the bear's thick hide, but they did nothing to slow it down. It turned its fury on her next, the sheer weight of its body that sent her skidding across the ice. Her skull cracked against a rock, her vision darkening at the edges as the world tilted. Blood trickled down her face, hot against the freezing air. Rachel, still conscious, tried to crawl toward her rifle. Her fingers brushed against the metal, But before she could grab it, the bear's weight crushed down on her. A deafening roar filled the air, a primal, earth-shaking sound that drowned out even the howling wind. She felt the unbearable pressure of its jaws closing around her torso, her ribs snapping like dry twigs. Her vision blurred, the edges darkening as her strength left her. Jessica's attempts to fight back were futile. The bear was relentless, its hunger driving it beyond pain, beyond hesitation. It tore into her, her struggles weakening until she was still. When the bear finally lifted its head, steam rose from its fur. It looked at the carnage, its breathing heavy, muscles trembling from exertion. The bodies lay still, with the only movement coming from the slow spread of blood soaking into the snow. Then, as if nothing had happened, the bear turned and disappeared into the trees. Days later, search teams arrived, following the signal from the officer's last known location. What they found was devastation. The vehicle, destroyed. The snow, stained with congealed blood. The officers' bodies, mauled beyond recognition. News of the attack sent shockwaves through the community. These were experienced officers, trained to handle the dangers of the wild, yet they had been caught off guard by the ruthless efficiency of nature's oldest predator. The bear was identified as the same one wildlife officials had tracked earlier in the year, a known aggressive individual that had eluded capture multiple times. Efforts were made to hunt it down, but by the time authorities mobilized, the grizzly vanished deep into the mountains. Search parties combed the forests for days, but the beast had returned to the wilderness, leaving behind nothing but the memory of what it had done. In February 2025, a cold wind blew across Anchorage, Alaska, as families gathered at the Arctic Wildlife Zoo. Among the visitors was 10-year-old Ethan Larson, who had come with his parents and older sister. The zoo was one of his favorite places, and he had been looking forward to this trip for weeks. Ethan loved animals, especially large and powerful ones like polar bears. He had read about them in books, watched documentaries, and even collected toy figures. Seeing them in real life was always exciting. The Arctic Wildlife Zoo was well known for its polar bear exhibit. It had a large open enclosure designed to resemble the bear's natural habitat, with icy pools and rocky terrain. Visitors could observe the bears from a safe viewing platform, separated by a tall glass barrier and a lower railing. The zoo had warning signs advising visitors not to lean over the barrier, but Ethan was too eager to get a closer look. As they approached the exhibit, Ethan rushed ahead of his family. His parents called for him to slow down, but his eyes were locked on the massive white bears moving through the snow-covered enclosure. The bears were fascinating, their thick fur shining under the winter sun. Ethan leaned over the railing, gripping the edge for a better view. His parents were a few steps behind, taking pictures of the exhibit. Ethan shifted his weight forward just a little too much without realizing it. His fingers slipped from the railing, and before he could react, his body tilted forward. The moment seemed to slow down as he lost his balance. A gasp echoed from the people around him. Ethan tumbled over the barrier instantly and plunged into the enclosure below. The fall was not long, but the impact was hard. Ethan hit the snowy ground, and his body landed with a thud. For a second, everything was silent. Then, panic spread through the crowd as people realized what had happened. His mother screamed his name, and his father ran toward the railing, his face frozen in shock. One of the polar bears turned its head toward the sudden movement inside the enclosure. It had been resting near the pool's edge, but now it was alert, watching the small figure that had entered its space. At first, the bear hesitated, but then it started moving toward Ethan. The boy scrambled to his feet, but there was nowhere to run. The enclosure walls were too high to climb, and the cold ground made it hard to move quickly. Zookeepers rushed to the scene, shouting and waving their arms to distract the bear. Some visitors grabbed their phones, calling for help, while others looked away, unable to watch. Now only a few steps away from Ethan, the bear lowered its head and advanced. The terrified boy had no escape. The crowd held its breath as the inevitable happened. The polar bear moved quickly, its powerful legs carrying it across the icy ground. Ethan tried to step backward, but his feet slipped on the snow. The bear reached him in seconds, knocking him down with a heavy paw. The force sent his small body rolling across the enclosure. Gasps and screams filled the air as visitors watched in horror. Zookeepers continued shouting, trying to distract the bear, but it was too late. The bear pins Ethan to the ground, its sharp claws tearing through his clothes. The boy struggles, his arms flailing as he tries to escape. From above, his parents cry out, their faces frozen in terror. Zoo staff grab equipment, but there is no easy way to reach the enclosure floor in time. Some employees rush to unlock a gate leading inside, but every second feels too long. Within moments, the bear overpowers Ethan. Its massive jaws closed over him, and the struggle stopped. The boy's small frame lay still in the snow. Zookeepers fired noise-making devices to scare the bear away. It hesitated before finally backing off, leaving Ethan motionless on the cold ground. Rescue teams arrived within minutes, but the damage had already been done. Ethan was lifeless, his body marked by deep wounds. Paramedics checked for any sign of life, but they could do nothing. A heavy silence fell over the area as the reality of the situation set in. The zoo was immediately closed, and police launched an investigation. Authorities reviewed security footage and interviewed witnesses. Signs had been posted warning visitors to stay behind the safety barriers, but a small mistake had led to a tragic loss. Officials debated whether additional measures should be taken to prevent such accidents in the future. Ethan's family was devastated. His parents were in shock, unable to process what had happened. His sister, who had been just a few steps away when he fell, was overwhelmed with grief. The family had come for a fun day at the zoo, never imagining it would end in such heartbreak. News of the attack spread quickly, drawing national attention. Wildlife experts discussed the nature of polar bears, explaining that they are powerful predators that react instinctively to sudden movements. Some questioned whether the bear should be euthanized, but others argued that it was only following its natural behavior. In the end, zoo officials decided not to harm the animal, stating that it had not acted out of aggression, but rather out of instinct. A memorial was set up outside the zoo, where people left flowers, stuffed animals, and messages of support for Ethan's family. In the following weeks, parents who visited the zoo held their children's hands tighter, reminded of how unpredictable nature can be. The tragedy cast a long shadow over the community, leaving a deep and lasting impact. In the aftermath, park officials conducted thorough reviews of safety protocols, leading to stricter measures and reinforced barriers. Visitors, once carefree, now approached animal enclosures with a newfound caution, reminded of the fragile boundary between human curiosity and wildlife unpredictability. The heartbreaking loss of a young life served as a stark and painful lesson, a reminder of why these protective measures exist, not just for the safety of people, but also for the well-being of the animals that call the sanctuary home. On September 3rd, 2023, the sun rose over a national park in northwestern Montana, casting golden light over the rugged mountains and dense forests. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and earth. The park, known for its breathtaking views and challenging trails, attracted hikers nationwide. Mark Reynolds is a 34-year-old experienced hiker from Denver, Colorado. He has spent most of his life exploring the wilderness, seeking peace in the solitude of nature. He has hiked through Yosemite, the Appalachian Trail, and even the Alaskan backcountry, always prepared for the unpredictable dangers of the wild. Mark had planned this solo trip to the national park in Montana for months. It was meant to be a quiet escape from his busy life in the city. He carried everything he needed: a tent, food, a GPS, and bear spray, knowing the risks of hiking alone in grizzly territory. Confident in his skills, he believed he could handle any situation. By mid-morning, Mark set out on Hidden Lake Trail, one of the park's most scenic routes. The trail wound through thick forests and open meadows, offering stunning views of the towering peaks. He walked steadily, enjoying the peaceful sounds of nature, the distant calls of birds, the rustling leaves, and the soft crunch of his boots against the dirt path. Hours passed as he moved deeper into the backcountry. He stayed alert, looking for signs of wildlife. Although grizzly bears were common in the area, Mark had never had a dangerous encounter. He kept his bear spray easily accessible, just in case. As he rounded a sharp curve in the trail, everything changed. Without warning, a mother grizzly and her two cubs appeared just ahead. Mark had unknowingly stepped too close, startling the bear. The mother grizzly immediately reacted, her instincts kicking in to protect her young. Mark's heart pounded as the huge bear locked eyes on him, her muscles tensed. With a powerful roar, she charged. Mark instinctively reached for his bear spray, fumbling with the canister. He knew he had only seconds to act, but as he raised the spray and pressed the trigger, a sudden wind blew it back into his face. Blinded and coughing, Mark stumbled backward, struggling to see. His eyes burned as he wiped at them, panic setting in. The bear closed the distance quickly. Mark turned and ran toward the nearest tree, desperate to climb. His boots slipped against the rough bark as he tried to pull himself up. But before he could get high enough, the grizzly reached him, her powerful claws swiping his leg. He was dragged down with crushing force, his body hitting the ground hard. The peaceful trail had turned into a place of terror, and no one was there to help. The grizzly sank its claws into Mark's back, pinning him with enormous weight. He struggled, but the bear's strength was overwhelming. The powerful jaws closed around his shoulder, shaking him violently. Mark's screams echoed through the trees, but there was no one nearby to hear him. The attack was swift and brutal, leaving no chance for escape. The forest grew silent again as quickly as it had begun. Satisfied that the threat was gone, the mother bear turned back toward her cubs. She disappeared into the dense trees, leaving only Mark's broken remains behind. For 3 days, Mark's absence went unnoticed. He had planned to return to the ranger station by the evening of September 4th, but when he did not check in, park rangers became concerned. Following his GPS signal and last known trail route, a search team was sent out. On September 6th, 2023, rangers discovered a disturbing sight deep in the wilderness. Mark's remains were scattered near the base of the tree where he had tried to escape. His backpack was torn apart, claw marks covering what was left of his gear. His body had been partially buried, a behavior common among grizzlies protecting a kill. The discovery shocked the rangers, though they were not unfamiliar with bear attacks. The national park had seen bear encounters before, but very few resulted in death. Wildlife officers reviewed Mark's gear, confirming that he had been well prepared. His bear spray had been used, but the wind had turned against him at the worst moment. The news of the attack spread quickly, sending waves of fear through the hiking community. Experienced hikers debated the risks of solo hiking and questioned whether strict rules should be implemented for backcountry travelers. Some argued that solo hiking should be banned in grizzly territory, while others insisted that Mark had simply been unlucky, caught in a rare and tragic situation. Officials reinforced safety measures in the park, installing more warning signs along trails where bears had been frequently spotted. Rangers increased patrols and encouraged hikers to travel in groups rather than alone. The attack sparked a renewed focus on bear safety training, making anyone venturing into the backcountry mandatory. Mark's family struggled to accept the loss. His love for the wild had been a defining part of his identity, yet it had also led to his death. They hoped that his story would warn others that even the most experienced outdoors people were never truly safe in grizzly country. The trail where Mark had died remained untouched, a silent reminder of the dangers hidden in nature. Hikers continued to walk the same path, but now with greater caution, knowing that the wilderness could turn deadly instantly. The mountains and forests of the national park in northwestern Montana remained unchanged. Still, the memory of Mark Reynolds' final moments lingered, a lesson etched into the heart of every traveler who dared to walk alone into the wild. The Alaskan wilderness stretched endlessly, vast, untamed, and indifferent. Towering peaks loomed in the distance, their jagged edges cutting into the sky. Dense forests sprawled below, their thick canopies swallowing the light. It was a place of beauty, but also of danger, where survival was never guaranteed, and Mark Davis understood that. At 34, he was an experienced hiker, comfortable with solitude and the demands of the wild. He had spent months planning this trek, meticulously mapping his route and packing supplies. A week alone in the backcountry was nothing new to him, just another test of endurance, another chance to lose himself in the quiet vastness of nature. In early August 2023, he set out with confidence. His pack was secured, his steps steady. The first few days passed in a rhythmic blur, with the crunch of boots on soil, the crisp scent of pine in the air, and the distant cry of an eagle soaring overhead. He moved through valleys, climbed ridges, and let the isolation sink into his bones. The wilderness was his to navigate, and he relished it. By the 5th day, fatigue had begun to settle in. His legs ached, his food supply had grown monotonous, and his body craved rest. He found a quiet spot near a river, the steady rush of water a soothing backdrop as he set up camp. The fire crackled, fending off the night's chill. He ate, stretched out beneath the stars, and drifted into sleep, unaware that something had been watching him. The grizzly had been in the area for days, moving silently through the undergrowth, its hunger sharpening with each passing moment. Food had grown scarce for the bear, forcing it to take risks. It had caught Mark's scent hours ago, and now, in the dead stillness before dawn, it made its move. The attack came with terrifying speed. One moment the forest was quiet. The next, a force of pure muscle and fury exploded from the trees. Heavy paws tore through the brush, closing the distance between predator and prey in seconds. Mark jolted awake, but there was no time to react. The bear's massive weight slammed into him, knocking the air from his lungs. Claws raked across his side, slicing through fabric and skin like paper. The pain was instant, blinding, but there was no time to process it. The grizzly's jaws found his shoulder, teeth sinking deep, crushing muscle and bone with terrifying ease. Panic drowned out the pain. Mark kicked wildly, his boot slamming into the bear's thick hide, but it did nothing. Its sheer power was overwhelming. It lifted him effortlessly, dragging him away from his camp, away from the fire, deeper into the woods. The ground scraped against his back as he fought, his fingers clawing at the ground, grasping for anything to stop the inevitable. But the bear was relentless. It did not hesitate, did not pause. This was not a warning, not a defensive swipe. This was a hunt. Mark was prey. His screams were swallowed by the vast emptiness of the wilderness, lost in the indifference of the land that had once felt so familiar. And then, silence. Days passed before anyone realized he was missing. Mark had told few people of his plans. He had always preferred solitude, trusting his own skills over the company of others. But when he failed to return, search teams were sent into the backcountry, their voices calling his name, their eyes scanning the endless expanse of forest. At first, they found only remnants: a torn tent, his gear scattered, claw marks gouged deep into the dirt. Then, they saw the tracks. Massive prints leading away from the campsite, dragging impressions in the soil hinting at what had happened. The realization was grim. For weeks they scoured the wilderness, hoping for a sign, a miracle. But the forest had already decided his fate. The grizzly had done what it was meant to do: survive. Deep in its territory, beneath layers of leaves and dirt, it had hidden its kill. What it could not eat immediately, the bear buried, protecting its prize from scavengers. It wasn't until wildlife officials tracked the bear down and euthanized it that the truth was confirmed. The final pieces of Mark's story were found inside the beast's stomach, a brutal, undeniable end. News of the attack sent waves through the hiking community. Cautionary warnings resurfaced, reminding adventurers of the unpredictable nature of the wilderness. But those who understood the wilderness knew this was no anomaly. The wilderness had always been dangerous. Grizzlies had always ruled these forests. Mark had been skilled, careful, but in the end, it hadn't mattered. On August 5th, 2023, a national park in southwest Alaska, the vast wilderness stretched endlessly, untouched and unforgiving. The thick forests, towering mountains, and rushing rivers made it one of the most remote places in the country. Wildlife thrived here, especially grizzly bears, which roamed freely and ruled the land with their size and strength. Hank Larson, a 62-year-old commercial fisherman, had spent most of his life navigating these waters. Born and raised in Homer, Alaska, he had learned the ways of the wild from his father, a fisherman before him. As a teenager, Hank could read the changing winds and track the salmon runs like a seasoned expert. Though full of danger, The ocean was his home, and the land had always felt familiar to him. Hank was a man of routine. Every summer he embarked on a solo fishing trip, traveling deep into Alaska's backcountry, away from the noise of civilization. He preferred solitude, finding peace in the sounds of rushing water, the cries of distant eagles, and the crackle of a campfire under the night sky. Some thought he took too many risks, venturing into bear country alone, carrying only a rifle and his knowledge. But Hank had always trusted himself. On the morning of August 5th, Hank loaded his small aluminum boat with everything he needed: a tent, fishing gear, food rations, and his rifle. He set off toward Silver Salmon Creek, a well-known fishing spot deep in bear territory. The area was isolated and accessible only by boat or float plane. Few dared to stay there alone, but Hank had been coming for years. By afternoon, he had arrived at his usual campsite, a small clearing near the river. He pulled his boat ashore, secured his supplies, and pitched his tent near a cluster of trees. He knew how to keep a clean camp, storing food properly and sealing trash, but the smell of fresh fish had a way of lingering. The first day was peaceful. Hank reeled in large salmon, cooking one over an open fire. The cool evening breeze carried the scent through the trees. As the sky darkened, he sat by the flames, listening to the sounds of nature. The occasional splash of a bear fishing downstream didn't concern him. He had seen them, massive and powerful, standing in the water, swiping at salmon with their huge claws. He respected them, but he had never been afraid. As midnight approached, the fire burned low. Hank checked his rifle, placing it beside him before crawling into his sleeping bag. The night was calm, and the only sound was the gentle rustling of the wind through the trees. But he was not alone. Somewhere in the dark forest, a grizzly bear was watching. The bear had caught the scent of Hank's fish hours earlier, tracking it through the dense underbrush. It was a massive animal, a dominant predator of the region, and it had learned that where humans were, food often followed. Hank did not hear the soft crunch of heavy paws moving closer, nor did he notice the dark shadow shifting between the trees. The bear was only feet away, its deep breaths almost lost in the wind. Then, without warning, the bear lunged. Its claws tore through the thin fabric of the tent, slashing violently. Hank jolted awake, his confusion turning to horror. He reached for his rifle, but the beast was already on him. A powerful jaw clamped down on his shoulder, dragging him from his tent with terrifying force. The peaceful night erupted into pure chaos. The riverbank, once calm, became a place of terror. The bear overpowered Hank instantly, its claws ripping through his body and its teeth sinking deep into his flesh. His screams echoed for only a moment before fading into silence. And then, the wilderness grew quiet again, as if nothing had ever happened. The night remained silent after the attack, the peaceful sounds of the wilderness masking what had just occurred. Hank's body, torn and lifeless, lay near his destroyed tent, deep claw marks covering his chest and arms. The grizzly had dragged him several feet away, leaving behind a trail of blood and trampled grass. Like most predators, the bear followed its instincts, partially burying Hank's remains and hiding its kill for later. Days passed before anyone realized something was wrong. Hank had planned to return on August 8th, but when he failed to check in, his longtime friend and fishing partner, Bill Parker, grew concerned. Bill knew Hank never missed a scheduled return. He contacted local authorities, explaining that Hank had gone deep into the national park alone, which is known for its large grizzly populations. On August 9th, a search and rescue team was dispatched. The crew flew over Silver Salmon Creek in a small bush plane, looking for any signs of movement. They spotted Hank's aluminum boat, still pulled up on the shore. The engine was untouched, and the supplies were still packed neatly inside. From above, everything appeared normal, but there was no sign of Hank. A group of park rangers and wildlife officers arrived by boat, stepping onto the shore with caution. Immediately, they saw signs of a struggle. His tent was shredded, belongings scattered, a rifle lying unused on the ground. Large grizzly tracks covered the area, circling the remains of the camp. The search team spread out, following a faint trail of drag marks leading into the trees. Less than a mile from camp, they found what was left of Hank. His remains had been partially buried under dirt and leaves, a bear's way of storing food for later. His body showed clear evidence of a violent attack, with deep bite wounds and large gashes across his torso. The discovery shocked even the most experienced wildlife officers. Though grizzly attacks were rare, they knew a bear protecting its food was dangerous. They set up motion sensor cameras around the area, hoping to determine if the same bear would return. The news devastated the fishing community in Homer, Alaska. Hank had spent his life navigating the wild, always aware of its dangers. But his experience could not protect him from an ambush attack in the dead of night. Wildlife experts examined the site and determined that Hank had likely been attacked while he slept, giving him no chance to react. His rifle remained unfired, and his supplies were untouched, further proving the sudden nature of the attack. The incident sparked debates across Alaska. Many argued that fishermen and solo travelers should be required to carry emergency beacons or stronger protection against bears. Others insisted that Hank had simply been unlucky, caught in one of nature's most brutal realities. The grizzly responsible for the attack was never found. Rangers patrolled the area but saw no sign of the massive predator. They left the wilderness untouched, allowing nature to continue as it always had. Hank was buried in Homer, his hometown, where his family and friends gathered to remember him. People shared stories of his adventures, knowledge of the land, and deep love for Alaska. His passing was a reminder that no one was ever truly safe in the wild, no matter how skilled. Even after his death, Hank's story lived on. His name was spoken among fishermen, a warning to those who ventured too far alone. Hikers and outdoors people became more cautious, knowing that the same fate could await anyone unprepared for the unpredictable nature of Alaska's wilderness. The rivers continued flowing, the mountains stood unchanged, and the grizzlies roamed freely. But for those who knew Hank, the wild would never feel the same again. In August 2024, Jake and his 16-year-old daughter, Sophie, set out on a horseback trip through the Teton Wilderness in Wyoming. Jake had spent most of his life around horses, working as a guide for tourists and hunters. He knew these lands well and dreamed of sharing his love for the wild with his daughter. Sophie had grown up hearing stories of her father's adventures and had finally convinced him to take her on a long ride deep into the wilderness. The trip was supposed to be a peaceful journey, a chance to bond while exploring the beauty of nature. The morning air was crisp as they rode along a narrow trail surrounded by towering pine trees. Their horses moved steadily over rocky terrain, the rhythmic sound of hooves echoing in the quiet forest. Jake led the way, keeping an eye out for signs of wildlife. Sophie followed closely behind, her excitement clear as she took the breathtaking views. They had already spotted a herd of elk grazing in the distance and a bald eagle soaring high above. Everything felt calm, just as Jake had hoped. The atmosphere suddenly changed as they entered a dense part of the forest. The horses became uneasy, their ears twitching and their movements hesitant. Jake recognized the signs immediately. Something was nearby, something that made the animals nervous. Before he could react, a massive grizzly bear charged out of the thick brush, roaring as it sprinted toward them. The bear crashed into Jake's horse, knocking the animal to the ground. Jake was thrown violently from the saddle, landing hard on the rocky dirt. Pain shot through his body as he struggled to sit up, his heart pounding. Sophie gasped as her horse reared up, nearly throwing her off. She gripped the reins tightly, trying to stay in control, but the bear's attention quickly turned to her. The grizzly lunged at Sophie's horse, its powerful claws slashing at the terrified animal. The horse let out a painful scream as deep gashes tore through its flesh. Sophie clung to the saddle, her fear rising as the animal beneath her struggled to escape. Jake knew he had to act fast. Ignoring the pain in his body, he reached for the rifle strapped to his saddle. His hands shook as he lifted it, aiming at the massive predator. He fired once, then again. The bullet struck the bear, but it barely flinched. It turned its massive head toward Jake, its dark eyes filled with rage. Jake fired again, his mind racing as he realized how little time they had. He fired several more shots, his ears ringing from the sound. Finally, the bear hesitated, backing away slightly. It let out a low growl before retreating into the trees, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. Jake collapsed to the ground, his body aching from the fall. Blood dripped from his injuries, his breath coming in short gasps. Sophie slid off her horse, her hands shaking as she rushed to her father's side. They had survived, but the terror of the attack had changed them forever. Jake lay on the ground, trying to catch his breath. His body ached from the hard fall, and his clothes were torn and covered in dirt. He could feel sharp pain in his ribs and shoulder, but he forced himself to focus. Sophie knelt beside him, her face pale as she looked at the injuries on his arm and leg. Blood seeped from deep scratches where the bear's claws had torn through his skin. His breathing was heavy, but he knew they had to move before the bear returned. Sophie's horse stood nearby, trembling with fear. Its side was covered in deep wounds where the grizzly's claws had struck. Jake struggled to his feet, pain shooting through his body with every movement. He placed a hand on the horse, feeling its heavy breathing. The animal was still standing, but it was weak from the attack. Jake knew they had to get help as soon as possible. Jake turned to his horse, which had gotten up after the attack. The animal limped, shaken but still able to walk. He reached for his saddlebag and pulled a cloth, pressing it against his wounds. Sophie helped him onto his horse, her hands shaking as she held her injured animal's reins. They had to get back to camp before nightfall. The ride back was slow and painful. Jake winced with every movement, and Sophie kept looking over her shoulder, afraid the grizzly would return. The forest felt different now, no longer peaceful, but filled with danger. Every rustling leaf and distant sound made them nervous. The only goal was to get to safety before darkness made it impossible to see. After hours, they reached the trail leading to their camp. The sight of their tents brought relief, but the fear of the attack still clung to them. Jake slid off his horse, barely able to stand. Sophie quickly helped him to the ground, doing her best to keep him steady. His leg was swollen, and blood still seeped through his torn clothes. Sophie grabbed the emergency radio from their supplies, her hands fumbling with the buttons as she called for help. The signal was weak, but she reached someone after several tries. She explained what had happened, her voice shaking as she spoke. The response came quickly. Help was on the way. As they waited, Jake leaned against a tree, his body exhausted. Sophie sat beside him, her face still pale. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the camp. The silence between them was heavy. The attack had changed everything. The wilderness no longer felt safe. When the rescue team arrived, they quickly assessed Jake's wounds and checked on Sophie's injured horse. Jake was taken away for medical treatment, and the horse was carefully returned to safety. The attack would leave scars, both on their bodies and in their minds. The land they had once loved now carried the memory of fear. Mountain View Wildlife Park had long been a favorite attraction for nature enthusiasts. Nestled in the rolling hills of California, it offered visitors a rare chance to see some of the world's most magnificent animals up close. But for all the precautions taken, the animals remained what they were: powerful, unpredictable, and utterly untamed. On March 3rd, 2023, Karen Ellis arrived at the park with eager anticipation. At 29, she was an avid traveler and photographer, always seeking out moments of raw beauty. The special event that day had drawn a small crowd, an exclusive tour which was allowing visitors a closer look at the park's most impressive animals. For Karen, it was the perfect opportunity to capture something extraordinary. The brown bear enclosure was one of the park's main attractions. The bear, a massive male that weighed over 900 pounds, had been in captivity for years. Though accustomed to human presence, the bear remained a force of nature, his strength evident in every movement. The steel bars of his enclosure were thick, reinforced by additional fencing to prevent any chance of escape. As the group gathered near the bear's habitat, Karen felt the familiar rush of excitement. Camera in hand, she maneuvered closer, angling for the perfect shot. The bear was pacing, restless, his thick fur rippling with every step. Whether it was the crowd's presence, the noise, or something deeper, some primal irritation, his agitation was palpable. Ignoring the warning signs, Karen leaned in. The fence separating her from the bear was meant to provide a buffer, a safe distance for observation. But the need for a closer view, a better angle, overrode her caution. She stretched forward, her camera lens extending just beyond the designated boundary. The bear moved faster than anyone expected. In a flash, a massive paw shot through the bars. Claws like curved daggers hooked into Karen's arm, sinking deep into flesh. A terrible force yanked her forward, slamming her against the metal fence. The air left her lungs in a choked gasp as pain erupted through her body. Its weight was overwhelming, her arm locked in an iron vise. She struggled, feet scrambling against the ground, but the bear was relentless. His powerful muscles flexed as he pulled again, his claws raking down her torso, tearing through fabric and skin. A desperate surge of adrenaline coursed through her veins as she fought to wrench herself free. Her body twisted violently, pain radiating from every wound. The jagged edges of the fence scraped against her as she thrashed. Blood seeped down her arm, dripping onto the concrete below. The bear's breath was hot, the scent of raw earth and musk filling her senses. All around her, chaos erupted. People shouted, hands grabbed at her, trying to pull her back. A sharp, sudden crack split the air, a tranquilizer dart fired by zoo staff. The bear snarled, the sound deep and guttural, but his grip loosened. His head shook, his muscles tensing before the sedative took hold. Freed from his grasp, Karen collapsed onto the ground, her body trembling, the world spinning around her. Pain was everywhere, a burning, throbbing presence in her arm and her side. Blood soaked her clothing, her skin torn and raw. Her breaths came in ragged gasps, the shock dulling the full extent of her injuries. Paramedics arrived within minutes, their hands firm yet careful as they assessed the damage. Her arm, nearly shredded, bore deep gashes where the bear's claws had sunk in. Her broken bones jutted beneath bruised skin. The wounds along her torso were severe, but her arm posed the greatest danger. Torn tendons, exposed muscle, a wound that would take months, perhaps years, to fully recover from. The ride to the hospital was a blur, a mix of flashing lights and urgent voices. Painkillers dulled the worst of it, but the memory of the attack lingered sharp, replaying in her mind with brutal clarity. The sheer power of the bear, the helplessness of being trapped in its grasp, the terrifying realization that she had been moments away from something far worse. It lingered, settling deep in her bones. Surgery was inevitable. The damage to her arm required extensive reconstruction. Doctors worked to repair torn tissue, to set the broken bones, to ensure that function, however limited, could be restored. The physical toll was immense, but the psychological scars were just as deep. The attack had been brief, yet it had changed everything. In the days that followed, the incident dominated headlines. Questions arose about zoo safety, about the precautions taken, or lack thereof, that had allowed such an attack to happen. The park faced scrutiny, its protocols examined and criticized. Changes were inevitable, and barriers were reinforced. Signage made more explicit. Visitor policies adjusted to prevent another near tragedy. For Karen, recovery was slow. The physical pain was one thing, but the mental weight of the experience was something else entirely. The fear lingered, creeping into her dreams, manifesting in sudden, involuntary flinches whenever she recalled the bear's sheer force. She had survived, but survival came with its own challenges. The wild animals, even in captivity, were not meant to be tamed. The bear had acted on instinct, responding to a moment of perceived intrusion. It was a stark reminder that no matter the setting, no matter the barriers put in place, nature remained untouchable, uncontrollable. The scars on her body would heal in time. The deeper wounds, the ones hidden beneath the surface, would take longer. But one thing was certain. Karen Ellis would never forget the moment she came face to face with the raw, unrelenting power. On September 10th, 2023, a small group of tourists prepared for an exciting wildlife adventure in the Kamchatka Peninsula of eastern Russia. They had traveled thousands of miles from different places worldwide to film rare footage of Russian grizzly bears in their natural home. Their leader, Ivan Petrov, was a 52-year-old wildlife guide who had worked in Siberia for over 25 years. Ivan knew the mountains and forests well, respected the wildlife, and had kept tourists safe on countless trips. Among the tourists was Sarah Miller, a 28-year-old wildlife photographer from England, known for capturing beautiful photos of animals from around the globe. With Sarah was her friend Mark Wilson, a 30-year-old American from Texas who loved making nature documentaries. Mark carried multiple cameras, hoping to record amazing animal scenes to share online. Joining them were siblings Tom and Jenny Walker from Canada, both in their early 20s, traveling the world to film nature documentaries for schools back home. The group set out into the remote forests of the Siberian mountains. They planned to hike quietly, keeping their distance and filming bears without disturbing them. Ivan led them along a narrow trail surrounded by tall pine trees and thick bushes. Sunlight peeked through the leaves, creating small patches of light on the forest floor. The group moved slowly, cameras ready, hoping to spot the bears that lived in the area. Soon, Ivan raised his hand, signaling everyone to stop. Ahead, a huge Russian grizzly bear with 2 cubs stood near a clear opening. The bear family fed quietly, unaware of the group hidden behind the trees. The tourists began filming carefully, holding their cameras steady to get clear images. Excited, but cautious, they stayed quiet, watching the mother bear closely. But none noticed that Tom had stepped slightly closer, trying to adjust his GoPro for a better view. Suddenly, Tom accidentally pressed a button, causing his camera to beep loudly. The mother bear lifted her head sharply, sniffing the air. Everyone froze. Then the worst happened. The camera noise startled the bear, causing her to turn swiftly toward the tourists. Before Ivan could calm them, panic set in. Tom stumbled backward, dropping his backpack and making loud noises. The bear, now fully alerted, locked eyes on the group and growled deeply. Ivan signaled for everyone to back away slowly, but fear had taken over. Standing closest to the bear, Mark tried to back away momentarily, but his camera slipped from his hand and hit the ground with a loud noise. The bear reacted instantly, charging toward them with terrifying speed. Everyone scattered, screaming and running in different directions. Ivan shouted instructions to keep everyone calm, but the bear was unstoppable. The huge grizzly reached Mark, biting deeply into his shoulder, shaking him violently as blood poured from the wound. Mark's cries echoed through the trees as he fell to the ground, the bear towering over him. Chaos filled the forest as Ivan rushed forward, desperate to distract the bear, but the attack had only begun. Sarah captured the terrifying sequence on film and kept the camera rolling. The bear continued its attack, biting Mark again and crushing his chest with powerful jaws. Mark's screams stopped abruptly as the enormous animal killed him. The forest floor turned dark red with blood. Ivan shouted, waving his arms and throwing rocks toward the grizzly to scare it away. The others stood frozen in shock, their bodies shaking. The bear finally turned, looking at them briefly before returning to her cubs near the riverbank. Jenny and Tom quickly rushed toward Mark, hoping to save him. But Mark lay motionless, his body covered in blood from deep wounds across his shoulder and chest. It was clear the injuries were too severe. Mark had died instantly. Ivan quickly gathered the tourists and guided them safely out of the forest. Frightened and silent, they hurried back to their campsite. Sarah held her camera tightly, haunted by what she had just witnessed and filmed. Authorities arrived shortly after being called, searching the forest carefully. Mark's remains were recovered and sent home, leaving his family devastated. Officials questioned the group about what had happened, taking the cameras and videos for investigation. Within days, Sarah's footage went viral. People around the world watched the terrifying attack, shocked by its violence. The video sparked debates about safety measures during wildlife filming trips. Some people blamed the tourists for getting too close, while others demanded better rules to protect humans and animals. Local wildlife experts explained that the bear had only attacked to protect her cubs. They reminded tourists that mother bears could be dangerous if disturbed or frightened. Signs were placed along trails, warning hikers about bear habitats. Guides received new training about managing tourists near wildlife. The surviving group members returned home, haunted by what they had witnessed. Sarah stopped taking wildlife photos for several months, struggling with guilt and sadness. Tom often spoke about feeling responsible, knowing his actions had triggered the bear's reaction. The Siberian forest remained quiet, unchanged by the tragedy. The mother bear and her cubs continued living near the river, unaware of how their presence had changed lives forever. But the local community remembered, speaking softly about that tragic day. Tourists visiting Kamchatka Peninsula now walked the trails carefully, respecting the dangers hidden among the trees. Mark's family's life was forever changed. Their grief over his death remained strong, a painful reminder of nature's unpredictability. They hoped Mark's story would teach others to respect wildlife and remember the dangers of the wild. The beautiful forests of Siberia remained peaceful yet mysterious, but the memory of Mark's death lingered, reminding people that even in nature's calm beauty, danger was never far away. People now knew the forest was home to creatures who deserved caution, respect, and distance. The footage of Mark's tragic end continued to remind the world that nature could turn dangerous in an instant. In June 2024, Frank and his 14-year-old son Mason camped in a national park in the northwestern region of Wyoming. Dense forests and towering mountains surrounded them, creating a peaceful setting. Frank had always loved the outdoors and wanted to share that passion with Mason. It was their first camping trip alone together. He had taught his son how to build a fire, cook over an open flame, and stay safe in the wild. Mason was excited but a little nervous. He had read about bear attacks before, but his father assured him they had taken all necessary precautions. Their food was stored in a bear-proof container, and they had bear spray with them. As the sun set, they sat by the fire, discussing their plans for the next day. Mason wanted to go fishing at a nearby river, and Frank promised they would wake up early to do just that. That night, the forest was quiet. The stars shone brightly above them, and a cool breeze rustled the trees. But deep in the woods, a hungry grizzly bear was wandering. The bear had been struggling to find food, and the scent of their campfire and stored food led it straight to their tent. Just before dawn, Frank stirred in his sleeping bag, sensing movement outside. A heavy sound, like deep breathing, came from near their supplies, and his heart began to pound. He unzipped the tent slowly and peeked outside. The massive grizzly stood only a few feet away, sniffing the air. Its dark eyes locked onto him, and he knew they were in danger at that moment. Thinking quickly, Frank grabbed a flashlight and banged on a metal cup, trying to scare it away. The bear hesitated, then took a step closer. Desperate, he threw a rock, hitting its shoulder. That was a mistake. The grizzly growled and lunged forward, charging straight at him. Frank was knocked to the ground as the bear swiped at him with its powerful claws, tearing through his jacket and cutting into his skin. Pain shot through his body as he struggled beneath the weight of the massive animal. Mason woke up to the noise and saw his father working. Without thinking, he rushed forward, trying to pull the bear away, but the bear turned its attention to him. Mason screamed as the bear knocked him down, its sharp claws cutting into his back. The grizzly bit down, shaking him violently. Frank forced himself up despite his injuries, reaching for anything he could use. His fingers closed around his hunting knife. He plunged the blade into the bear's side with all his strength. The bear roared in pain, releasing Mason and stumbling back. Frank stabbed it again, forcing it to retreat. Bleeding, the bear finally turned and ran into the woods. Frank crawled to his son, holding him close. Mason's breathing was weak, his face pale from blood loss. He whispered something, then went still in his father's arms. Frank held his son close, his hands shaking. The cold morning air surrounded him, but he barely noticed. Mason lay lifeless in his arms, his body still and covered in deep wounds. Frank whispered his son's name, hoping for a response, but there was none. His chest tightened as the realization sank in. Pain shot through Frank's body as he tried to move. His arms and back were covered in gashes, and his clothes were soaked in blood. His vision blurred, but he knew he had to get help. He reached for his phone, his fingers numb and weak. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. With shaking hands, he dialed for emergency assistance. His voice was hoarse as he gave their location. The dispatcher told him to stay awake and keep pressure on his wounds until help arrived. Time passed slowly as he sat there, holding Mason. The forest was silent again, as if nothing had happened. Frank's thoughts raced. He had planned this trip to create memories with his son, but now he was leaving with unbearable loss. He blamed himself for not doing more to protect Mason. After what felt like forever, approaching footsteps broke the silence. Park rangers and paramedics arrived, their flashlights cutting through the dim light of morning. They rushed to Frank's side, assessing his injuries. When they saw Mason, their expressions darkened. They confirmed what Frank already knew. Mason had not survived. The medics helped Frank onto a stretcher, carefully bandaging his wounds. He barely noticed as they carried him away from the campsite. His mind was stuck on the moment when Mason had taken his last breath. The helicopter arrived shortly after, taking him to the nearest hospital. The journey was a blur. At the hospital, doctors worked quickly to treat Frank's injuries. His wounds were deep, but he would survive. The physical pain was nothing compared to the grief that filled him. He stared at the ceiling, feeling numb. The weight of what had happened crushed him. News of the attack spread quickly. Wildlife officials tracked down the grizzly responsible for the attack. They found it deep in the woods, weakened from its wounds. To prevent further danger, the grizzly was put down. Some people agreed with the decision, while others believed it was following its instincts. Mason's death shook the community. Friends and family gathered to support Frank, but nothing could take away his sorrow. The funeral was quiet, with loved ones remembering Mason's kindness and adventurous spirit. Frank sat in silence, unable to believe his son was gone. Days turned into weeks, but the pain did not fade. Frank struggled with guilt, replaying the events in his mind. He knew he had done everything possible, but it did not feel like enough. The scars on his body would heal, but the loss of Mason would stay with him forever. Cold bit deep in Yagodnoy that evening, the wind carving through the narrow streets like a blade. February had been relentless, the kind of winter that tested even those accustomed to hardship. Snow piled against the squat buildings, pressing against doors and windows, muffling sound. The village, though small, was not lifeless. Light still glowed in a handful of windows, the warmth within a stark contrast to the icy stillness outside. At the center of town, Alina Morozova was finishing up for the night. The beauty salon, her small sanctuary, had been a labor of love for years. Though clients were few in a place like this, she had built a modest business tending to the needs of the women in the village, offering haircuts, facials, and on occasion manicures. The space smelled of shampoo and lotions, their scents delicate against the sharper scent of acetone and hair dye. She moved with the practiced ease of routine, sweeping up stray hair, wiping down mirrors, putting tools in their proper places. Outside, the wilderness pressed in. The forest had always been there, sprawling beyond the edge of the village, its presence a constant fact of life. The people of Yagodnoye knew its ways and understood the rhythms of the land. But the rules of nature had begun to change. That winter had been harsher than most, and food was scarce for the creatures that lurked in the trees. There had been whispers of bold wolves venturing closer, their eyes flickering in the dark just beyond the reach of streetlights. And the bears, some had woken early, restless and hungry, the unnatural thaw followed by another freeze, confusing their instincts. Alina had heard the stories but thought little of them. She had lived here all her life, knew these dangers in an abstract way, the same way she knew the ice on the river could be treacherous in early spring. She locked up the register, stretched her aching back, and reached for her coat. It was late. The street outside was silent. Then came the sound, deep, guttural, and close. The bear had been watching. It had smelled the traces of food, the faint perfume of skin creams and something else, something unfamiliar but enticing. It had followed the scent through the village, the bear's massive paws crunching over frost-bitten snow, breath steaming in the frigid air. It was not like the usual village bears, the ones that rummaged through trash or snatched fish from the river. This one was desperate. Its ribs pressed against its thick fur, hunger gnawing at it with an urgency it could no longer ignore. The door was flimsy against its weight. A single powerful shove and the lock gave way, splinters scattering across the floor. The crash shattered the stillness, sending bottles toppling from shelves and a mirror cracking in protest. Alina froze, her breath catching in her throat. Panic hit first, raw and immediate. The bear stood in the doorway, massive, dark, its fur bristling with frost. Its breath came in heavy puffs, and its small eyes gleamed with a feverish hunger. Alina stumbled back, her mind racing, searching for an escape. The only exit was past the bear. The bear moved with terrifying speed, its claws skidding across the tile. Alina bolted toward the back room, her heartbeat slamming against her ribs. Shelves crashed behind her, the bear swiping at anything in its path, sending a cloud of shattered glass and plastic into the air. The scent of chemicals mixed with the sharp tang of fear. The back room was small, cluttered with supplies. Alina shoved against a cabinet, trying to wedge it between herself and the bear. It wasn't enough. The bear surged forward, its bulk knocking over the obstacle as if it were nothing. Its weight alone filled the room, its sheer presence suffocating. Then came the pain. The bear's first blow sent her sprawling. Claws like knives tore through fabric and skin, a sudden burst of agony that stole her breath. The world tilted, her vision blurring. Another swipe, this one worse. Hot blood spattered against the walls, soaking into discarded towels, darkening the floor. Instinct fought against inevitability. She kicked, struggled, tried to push herself away. A bottle of acetone tumbled from a shelf, the sharp scent burning the air. The bear ignored it, focused solely on the prey before it. The struggle was brief, violent. The bear's weight pinned her down, its breath hot against her skin. Teeth found purchase. Flesh tore. The salon, once so lovingly tended, became a scene of chaos and horror. The warm glow of the lamps cast long, grotesque shadows over the wreckage. Outside, the noise had not gone unnoticed. A neighbor, hearing the crash, had stepped onto his or her porch, squinting into the darkness. The sounds that followed, crashing. A scream that cut off too soon. The unmistakable growl of a predator sent a surge of alarm through the quiet village. People came running. A shotgun was fetched. But by the time the villagers reached the salon, it was too late. The bear, frenzied by the kill, turned on them. A shot rang out, shattering the night. The creature flinched but did not fall. It retreated, crashing through the broken door, vanishing into the snow-laden streets. What remained inside was a grim scene. The beauty salon, once a place of careful grooming and quiet conversation, was unrecognizable. Blood streaked the walls, pooling on the floor in dark, glistening swathes. Alina lay where she had fallen, her body torn and lifeless, her face frozen in a final expression of terror. The air was thick with the coppery scent of blood. The village moved quickly. A hunting party formed, tracking the bear's path through the snow, following the deep impressions of its massive paws. The animal had not gone far. Wounded, exhausted, it had taken refuge near the edge of the forest, where the trees stood silent and waiting. The second shot found its mark. The bear crumpled, the last breath leaving its massive chest in a slow, shuddering exhale. The great beast, once a force of nature, lay still, its fur matted with ice and blood. The villagers stood over it in silence, the weight of what had happened pressing down on them. By morning, the news had spread. The headlines painted the picture in stark, chilling words. A salon owner, brutally killed. A bear, tracked and put down. A village left rattled, reminded in the harshest terms that the wild was never far. That hunger could drive even the most powerful creatures into desperate, deadly acts. The beauty salon would never reopen. The building stood empty for months, becoming a silent monument to that terrible night. The people of Yagodnoye carried on, as they always did, but something had changed. Doors were locked earlier. Shadows were watched more carefully. And in the cold, unrelenting dark of winter, the forest felt closer than ever. July 19th, 2023, Tom Caldwell, a 57-year-old commercial fisherman, stood on the rocky shores of Kodiak Island, Alaska, finishing another long, tiring day at sea. Tom had fished these waters for over 30 years. He knew every part of the coastline, the safest places to anchor his boat, and the best areas to catch salmon. Friends and co-workers respected him, calling him one of the most experienced fishermen on the island. Born and raised in Alaska, Tom learned to fish from his father. Fishing was more than a job for Tom. It was his life. He loved the ocean, the quiet moments at sunrise, and even the rough storms that tested his skills. Over the years, Tom learned to live peacefully alongside Kodiak bears, the largest bears in Alaska, often seeing them from a safe distance along the shore. That evening, Tom carefully unloaded his catch. He placed fish into crates and glanced toward the thick trees nearby. A huge Kodiak bear stood silently at the forest's edge, watching him closely. Tom paused briefly, then continued working, confident that the bear was curious. He had seen bears countless times before, so he felt no fear. After finishing, Tom set up a small camp for the night. His co-workers stayed in separate tents nearby. They all understood the risks of living in bear territory, but trusted Tom's judgment. He cooked a small meal, then checked his rifle to ensure it was ready, placing it carefully beside his sleeping bag. As darkness fell over Kodiak Island, Tom drifted off to sleep, unaware that the bear had never left. It had quietly moved closer, hidden by trees and shadows, watching Tom's every move. Investigators later believed the bear had stalked Tom for hours, patiently waiting. Around midnight, the peaceful silence suddenly broke. Tom's co-workers woke abruptly to loud shouts coming from his camp. Then came gunshots, 2 loud blasts echoing through the night. Panic filled their hearts as they quickly ran toward Tom's camp, fearing the worst. When they reached his tent, it was empty. The fabric was torn, and Tom's belongings were scattered across the ground. They found his rifle lying near the tent, unused rounds beside it. Fearful, they scanned the area with flashlights, desperate to find their friend. Just a short distance away, the powerful beam of a flashlight revealed a chilling sight. Tom's mauled body lay motionless on the ground, his clothing shredded, deep claw and bite wounds covering his body. The bear's massive strength had ended his life swiftly and violently. His friends stared in shock, unable to move or speak. The experienced fisherman, who had always respected the wildlife around him, had become a tragic victim. The forest remained silent and dark, hiding the deadly predator that had claimed Tom's life. Tom's co-workers stood frozen in shock, staring at the lifeless body of the man they had worked with for years. The night was silent, except for the distant sound of the waves hitting the shore. Fear gripped them as they realized the Kodiak bear could still be nearby, watching from the darkness. They quickly radioed for help, their voices shaking as they reported the attack. A rescue team and wildlife officers were dispatched immediately and sped toward the remote site. Still in disbelief, the fishermen stayed close together, their flashlights scanning the trees, afraid the bear would return. When the authorities arrived, they carefully examined the area. Tom's body showed deep claw marks, evidence of the bear's powerful strikes. His injuries were fatal, and there had been no chance for him to escape. His tent was torn apart, his belongings scattered, and blood stained the ground around him. The officers determined that the bear had been stalking Tom for hours before attacking. Kodiak bears are known for their intelligence and patience. This one had waited until the moment was right. Investigators found large footprints leading from the tree line to the tent and back again, suggesting the predator had circled the area multiple times before striking. The tragic news quickly spread through Kodiak Island, shaking the local fishing community. Although people had always known the risks of working in bear territory, Tom was one of the most experienced fishermen and understood the dangers better than anyone. No one was truly safe if a man like him could fall victim. Officials debated whether to track and remove the bear, but no immediate action was taken. Wildlife experts explained that Kodiak bears are highly territorial, and as human activity increases near the island's shores, encounters like this will become more frequent. They urged fishermen and campers to take stronger precautions, reinforce bear-proof campsites, and carry better protection. A few days later, Tom's funeral was held, attended by dozens of fishermen, friends, and family members. People shared stories of his bravery, skill, and love for the ocean. His absence left a deep void in the community, a reminder that nature can be beautiful and unforgiving. After the attack, Alaska's Fish and Game Management increased patrols around Kodiak Island and warned workers about recent bear activity. Local companies that operated in bear territory introduced new safety measures, requiring fishermen to secure campsites better and remain on high alert, especially at night. Tom's name became part of local legend, a cautionary tale repeated among new fishermen who came to the island. People respected the wilderness even more, knowing that one mistake, one moment of feeling too comfortable, could cost a life. The shores of Kodiak Island remained unchanged, the waters still rich with fish, the forests still home to some of the most powerful predators in the world. But for those who had known Tom Caldwell, the land and sea would never feel the same again. The air was still on the night of March 12, 2022. The kind of silence that only the deep wilderness could offer. No roads, no distant hum of civilization. Only the rhythmic lapping of the lake against the shore and the occasional rustling of unseen creatures in the underbrush. The world here belonged to the wild. Eric Daniels and his companions had set up camp in a secluded valley on Kodiak Island, a place where nature remained untouched, and the vastness of Alaska stretched endlessly in every direction. They had spent the day hiking along the ridgeline, their boots crunching over thawing earth as they marveled at the raw beauty of their surroundings. Towering evergreens, jagged peaks still capped in snow, the dark blue expanse of the lake reflecting the sky like a mirror. The trip had been everything they had hoped for. An escape from the modern world, a chance to test themselves against the wild, to breathe air that felt cleaner, sharper, untouched by human hands. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, temperatures plummeted. They had built a fire, its glow flickering against their tents, sending long shadows stretching across the frost-covered ground. The day's exertion left them exhausted, muscles aching in a satisfying way, and one by one they retreated into their tents. The fire burned low, crackling quietly as it fought against the cold, then died down to glowing embers. Beyond the reach of the campsite, something moved. The Kodiak bear had emerged from the forest hours earlier, its massive frame blending with the darkness, nostrils flaring as it followed the scent of food and human presence. The winter had been long, and the struggle for survival brutal. Hunger gnawed at its insides, an emptiness that could no longer be ignored. The bear had been roaming the edges of the valley, drawn in by the smell of smoked fish, the remnants of a meal that had been cooked too close to the tents. Instinct guided it. Food was near. The humans, nothing more than obstacles in its path, had unknowingly laid an invitation. The first sign of its presence was the crunch of heavy paws against frozen earth. The bear moved slowly, methodically, circling the camp. It stood on the outskirts, watching. The tents were fragile things, fabric stretched thin, the human sense within clear and distinct. It tested the air again, eyes gleaming in the faint moonlight, and then it stepped forward, silent despite its size, massive muscles shifting beneath thick fur. The bear chose a tent at random. Eric never had the chance to wake fully. The canvas tore apart in an explosion of claws and force, nylon ripping like paper as the bear lunged inside. One swipe sent him tumbling, blankets and sleeping bags tangling around him, his mind still struggling to wake. Then came the teeth, clamping onto his shoulder, crushing muscle and bone in a single devastating bite. The pain was instant, searing, and white-hot. He screamed, a sound so raw and filled with terror that it shattered the stillness of the night, sending his companions scrambling from their tents in a frantic blur. The bear dragged him out into the open, its immense strength rendering his struggles meaningless. He thrashed, kicked, tried to claw his way free, but it was useless. The weight of the beast pinned him down, its breath hot and reeking of decay. Another bite, deeper this time, tore through his side. He felt it. Felt the unbearable crush of pressure, the tearing of flesh, the sickening crunch of his ribs giving way. His friends were yelling, their flashlights cutting jagged beams through the darkness, but the bear showed no signs of relenting. It shook him, ragdolling his body as if testing its kill, then released him just long enough to reposition its grip. Blood pooled beneath him, steaming against the cold ground. His vision blurred, the world narrowing to nothing but pain and the immense, overpowering presence of the predator above him. One of his friends threw a rock through the air, striking the bear's flank. Another followed. The beast turned, momentarily distracted. Someone had grabbed a flare, the sudden burst of red light casting everything into a surreal, nightmarish glow. For a second, the bear hesitated, muscles coiled, nostrils flaring as it assessed the threat. Then, with a grunt, it backed away, its great bulk shifting into the shadows, disappearing into the tree line as quickly as it had come. Silence returned, broken only by the ragged breaths of those left standing. By the time they reached Eric, he was unrecognizable. His body lay twisted in the dirt, his clothes soaked in blood, and skin torn where claws and teeth had left their mark. He was still alive then, barely. Each breath came shallow, gurgling, his chest rising in weak, uneven movements. One of his friends pressed their hands against his wounds, trying to stop the inevitable. But it was too much, too deep, too brutal. His eyes, wide with shock, fluttered briefly, then closed. He did not open them again. The reality of the wilderness hit them hard in that moment. This place, so breathtaking in its beauty, was just as ruthless as it was majestic. The line between life and death was thin out here, and Eric had crossed it in an instant. The group moved quickly after that. One of them triggered the emergency beacon, their hands still slick with blood as they punched in the distress signal. They sat in silence, wrapped in blankets, huddled around the still-burning flare as they waited for help. The cold pressed down, the wind howled through the trees, and somewhere, beyond the reach of their light, the bear still lurked. When the search and rescue team arrived, dawn had barely begun to touch the sky. The body was taken first, wrapped carefully, reverently, though nothing could hide the horror of what had been done. A decision was made. The bear had to be found. It did not take long. The blood trail led deep into the forest, through dense thickets and frozen streams, winding toward a rocky outcrop where the creature had taken refuge. The men who followed that trail moved with purpose, rifles raised, their faces grim beneath the weight of their task. The bear did not run. It stood its ground, powerful even in its final moments, blood still staining its muzzle. There was no hesitation in the shot that followed. A single crack of gunfire, then another, and the great beast crumpled. The valley around them grew quiet again. Eric's death became a warning, whispered among those who ventured into the depths of the Alaskan wilderness. The mountains, the forests, the lakes. They did not belong to humanity. The people who lived by them, who passed through them, who sought their solitude and their beauty, did so only at the mercy of the creatures that ruled there. The campsite where Eric had stayed was abandoned after that. The tents were taken down, the fire pit buried beneath a fresh layer of earth, the ground wiped clean of everything except the memory of what had happened. But the wilderness remembered. The wind carried the echoes of his last moments. The trees stood witness. And the lake, so calm, so deceptively peaceful, would forever hold the story of the man who had come seeking adventure, only to become part of the wilderness itself. On July 22, 2023, in Scranton, Pennsylvania, the Miller family enjoyed a warm summer evening in their backyard. The smell of grilled food filled the air as they prepared for a quiet barbecue. The small suburban home was surrounded by trees, giving the family a peaceful retreat despite being close to the city. James Miller, 42, was a schoolteacher who loved spending weekends outside, grilling and playing with his two young children. His wife, Sarah, 39, was a nurse at the local hospital. She enjoyed gardening and often sat outside in the evenings, watching her children run around the yard. Their son, Ethan, was 7 years old, energetic and always looking for adventure. Their daughter, Lily, was 4, shy but playful, always following her brother wherever he went. The family had lived in Scranton for years. They had heard about black bear sightings in the area but had never been concerned. They believed bears stayed in the nearby forests and rarely entered residential neighborhoods. As James flipped burgers on the grill, Ethan and Lily played near the patio, laughing as they chased each other across the grass. Sarah set the table, enjoying the cool breeze of the evening. The peaceful moment did not last long. From the edge of their yard, a large black bear emerged from the trees. At first, no one noticed. The bear moved slowly, sniffing the air, drawn by the smell of cooked meat. Its dark eyes scanned the yard, its nose twitching. The bear had become used to human food, likely searching for an easy meal. When Sarah looked up, she froze. The bear was only a few yards away from the patio, its heavy paws pressing into the grass. Her heart pounded as she whispered James's name. He turned, his expression shifting from surprise to alarm. James stepped forward, raising his arms to appear bigger, trying to scare the bear away. He shouted, hoping to startle it, but the bear did not run. Instead, it lowered its head, growled, and stepped closer. James grabbed a chair, holding it out as a shield. Without warning, the bear lunged, swiping at James and knocking him to the ground. Its powerful jaws clamped down on his leg, teeth sinking deep into his flesh as he cried out in pain. Sarah screamed. She grabbed Ethan and Lily tightly and rushed inside the house. Then she slammed the door shut, her hands shaking as she locked it. From inside, the children sobbed in fear, clinging to their mother as James struggled outside. The bear had no intention of leaving, and James was running out of options. James struggled on the ground, his leg bleeding heavily from the deep bite. The bear growled, its weight pressing down on him as it clawed at his side. He kicked with his free leg, trying to push the animal off, but the bear was too strong. Inside the house, Sarah held Ethan and Lily close. Her hands trembled as she grabbed her phone and dialed 911. Her voice was panicked as she told the dispatcher what was happening. She could still hear James yelling outside, his voice filled with pain. Hearing the screams, the neighbors ran outside. One grabbed a flashlight and shouted to scare the bear away, but the animal remained focused on James. Another neighbor called the police, giving them the family's address. The bear pressed its jaws down again, shaking James's leg violently. His vision blurred from pain, but he refused to stop fighting. He grabbed a nearby rock and hit the bear's head, making it flinch for just a moment. The sound of approaching police sirens filled the air. Flashing lights appeared down the street, and within moments, officers rushed into the yard, guns drawn. They shouted at the bear, trying to force it away from James. When the bear refused to back down, one of the officers fired a shot. The bear let out a deep roar but did not run. Another shot followed, this time hitting the bear's side. The animal stumbled, released James, and collapsed onto the grass. It let out a final breath before lying completely still. Officers rushed to James, who lay on the ground, exhausted and covered in blood. Paramedics arrived within minutes, quickly treating his severe leg wounds before loading him into an ambulance. Sarah and the children ran outside, crying as they saw James being taken away. At the hospital, doctors worked to stop the bleeding and prevent infection. James survived, but his leg was badly damaged. Doctors warned that recovery would take months and that he might never regain full strength. The attack shocked the entire Scranton community. News stations covered the story, showing footage of the bear and the destroyed backyard. Wildlife experts confirmed that the bear had been conditioned to human food, likely from eating trash or being fed by people. Officials quickly introduced new laws, making it illegal to feed wild animals and requiring bear-proof trash bins in areas where sightings had increased. James was released from the hospital weeks later, using crutches to walk. Though physically healing, he struggled with the memory of the attack. The backyard, once a place of joy, now carried a painful reminder of that terrifying night. Sarah and the children were grateful he survived, but life would never feel the same. The peace of their home had been shattered, replaced by a lesson they would never forget. Wild animals were never predictable, and even in the quietest neighborhoods, nature could turn deadly instantly. In July 2024, Sam Whitaker, a dedicated and experienced park ranger, patrolled the vast wilderness of a national park in northwestern Montana. He had spent years protecting the park's wildlife and ensuring visitors remained safe. He knew the land well, from the deep forests to the cold mountain lakes. His work often took him into remote areas, where he monitored animal activity and checked for any signs of danger. The sun shone golden that morning as Sam set out on patrol. He carried his usual gear, including a radio, bear spray, and an emergency firearm. Though he had encountered many wild animals before, he always remained cautious. The national park was home to a large population of grizzly bears, and summer was a time when food became scarce, making some bears more aggressive. Sam noticed recent bear activity as he followed a narrow trail near a lake. Claw marks on trees and overturned rocks suggested that a large grizzly had been searching for food in the area. He remained alert, scanning his surroundings carefully. The sound of rustling bushes nearby made him stop. A massive grizzly bear stepped out of the trees, its powerful body towering over the ranger. Sam immediately recognized the bear's tense posture. It was not just curious, it was agitated, likely struggling to find food. The bear saw Sam as a threat or a potential meal. Understanding the danger, he followed his training, slowly backing away to avoid startling the animal. However, the bear suddenly charged before he could create a safe distance. With only seconds to react, Sam turned and ran toward a nearby tree, hoping to climb to safety. But the bear was too fast. It slammed into him with immense force, knocking him off balance and sending him tumbling down the rocky slope toward the lake. The impact left him momentarily dazed, and before he could recover, the grizzly was upon him again, its powerful claws raking across his body. Desperate to escape, Sam tried to reach for his bear spray, but the bear struck again, sending them into the lake. The cold water engulfed them, and Sam struggled to swim away. The bear, however, was relentless. It grabbed him, dragging him beneath the surface, preventing him from resurfacing. Bubbles rose to the top as Sam kicked and fought, but the bear's strength was overwhelming. The lake quickly returned to its eerie stillness, the only remnants of the struggle being the disturbed water and the slowly fading ripples. The wilderness fell silent once more. Hours later, when Sam failed to respond to radio calls, a search team was dispatched to find him. Following his patrol route, they arrived at the lake, the site of the attack. What they discovered would send shockwaves through the park community. Moving cautiously along the water's edge, the team searched for any sign of Sam. His patrol route had led him straight to this spot, and the churned-up water suggested something violent had occurred. Then, one of the rangers spotted deep claw marks in the dirt near the slope. The ground was torn as if a fierce struggle had taken place. Scattered pieces of broken equipment lay nearby, confirming their worst fears. They called for additional support, and soon, more rescuers arrived with boats and diving gear. The lake's calm water did not reveal what lay beneath, but the search had to continue. One of the divers prepared to enter, knowing that time had already passed since the attack. The icy water made the search difficult, and visibility was low. After several minutes, a shadow appeared beneath the surface. The ranger had been found. The lifeless body of Sam Whitaker was pulled from the lake, his uniform torn and his skin marked by deep wounds from the bear's powerful claws and teeth. The weight of the loss hit everyone at once. Sam had been a skilled ranger dedicated to protecting the wilderness that had taken him. His colleagues stood in silence, processing the tragedy. The news of the attack spread quickly. People who had known Sam shared memories of his dedication and kindness. Visitors who had met him during their trips to the park remembered his knowledge and passion for nature. The entire community mourned the loss of someone who had always put others' safety first. Authorities tracked the bear that had killed Sam. It did not take long to locate, as it had remained near the area. Rangers followed the trail, and after careful planning, the bear was euthanized to prevent further attacks. The decision was not taken lightly, as conservation efforts in the park focused on protecting wildlife. However, once a bear displayed such extreme aggression, it became too dangerous to allow it to remain near humans. Sam's passing left a lasting impact on the national park in northwestern Montana. To prevent similar incidents in the future, officials reviewed safety guidelines, placed more warning signs in high-risk areas, and adjusted patrol procedures to protect rangers better. Training sessions were also increased, teaching staff and visitors how to respond to bear encounters. His family and friends held a memorial in his honor. They shared stories of his bravery, love for the outdoors, and years of service. A plaque was placed in the park to remember him, ensuring his dedication would never be forgotten. Though time passed, the memory of that day remained strong. The attack reminded visitors of the park's wild and unpredictable nature. Visitors continued to explore its beauty, but with greater caution and respect. Sam Whitaker's legacy lived on in the hearts of those who knew him and the very land he worked so hard to protect. In March 2025, the cold winds of Siberia swept across the dense forests near Taiga, Russia. A police team of 6 officers, led by Dmitry Zaitsev, was assigned to patrol the remote roads near the forest. The experienced law enforcement members had spent the entire day responding to reports of illegal hunting in the area. As the sun set, they took a short break, parking their police van near the edge of the dense woods. The team, including officers Mikhailov, Ivanov, Petrov, Sokolov, and Lebedev, had worked together for years. They were used to harsh conditions, long hours, and the unpredictable dangers of the wild. Despite the risks of patrolling such an isolated region, they remained confident in their abilities. Their vehicle was sturdy, their weapons were loaded, and their training had prepared them for nearly every scenario. But nothing could have prepared them for what was about to happen. Unbeknownst to them, a starving Russian grizzly bear had desperately searched the forest for food. The harsh winter had left it weak and ravenous. The scent of food from the officers' supplies attracted the massive animal, leading it to their parked van. It remained hidden among the trees, watching and waiting for a while. Then, driven by hunger, it made its move. Without warning, the enormous bear charged at full speed, slamming into the side of the van with incredible force. The metal groaned under the impact as the officers, startled by the sudden noise, reached for their weapons. But before they could react, the bear had already torn through the door. Dmitry Zaitsev was the first to be grabbed, his body yanked from the vehicle in a matter of seconds. His desperate screams echoed through the cold air as the bear sank its teeth into him, dragging him away from the van. Mikhailov managed to grab his rifle, but before he could fire, the bear knocked the weapon from his hands and clamped its jaws down on his shoulder, tearing into his flesh. The other officers, now in a full state of panic, grabbed whatever they could: batons, knives, even their bare hands. But the bear was unstoppable. Ivanov and Petrov attempted to escape through the back door, but the bear turned its fury on them next. Claws and teeth ripped through their bodies as they struggled to break free. Sokolov and Lebedev tried to fight, but the sheer size and strength of the bear overwhelmed them. Within minutes, the last of the officers fell, their bodies left lifeless inside and around the van. By the time the sun had completely set, silence had returned to the forest. The once active police unit was gone. The bear, now covered in blood, stood victorious over the destruction it had caused. The remote Siberian landscape held no witnesses, and hours would pass before anyone realized what had happened. The bodies of the 6 officers remained in and around the police van as the night grew colder. The grizzly bear, still hungry, lingered nearby, occasionally sniffing the ground before retreating into the forest. Hours passed without disturbance. The radio inside the vehicle crackled with incoming messages, but no one was left to answer. Concern grew at the Taiga Police Department when the officers failed to check in. Repeated attempts to contact them went unanswered. A second patrol team was dispatched before dawn to investigate. The roads leading to the forest were covered in a thin layer of frost, slowing the journey. The officers, expecting nothing more than a simple vehicle breakdown, were unprepared for the sight that awaited them. As the first rays of sunlight touched the treetops, the rescue team arrived at the scene. The van's side door was torn apart, and deep claw marks were visible along the metal frame. Nearby, the officers' weapons and personal belongings were scattered across the ground. Then, they saw the bodies. Dmitry Zaitsev's remains lay a few meters away from the van, partially buried in the snow, his uniform ripped apart. Mikhailov's body was slumped near the vehicle, his shoulder covered in deep bite wounds. The others were found nearby, their injuries severe and their faces barely recognizable. The team immediately called for reinforcements. Soon, more officers and medical personnel arrived, but they could do nothing. The entire unit had been wiped out. The brutal nature of the attack made it clear that no one had survived long enough to call for help. Authorities quickly launched a search for the bear responsible. Experienced trackers examined the area, following the large footprints leading into the trees. It did not take long to find the animal. The bear was still in the forest, resting near a patch of frozen ground. Its fur was stained with blood, and its movements were sluggish. When approached, it showed signs of aggression, but it was clear the animal was weak from starvation. A decision was made to put the bear down. Shots rang through the air, and within moments, the threat was eliminated. Wildlife experts later examined the bear's body and confirmed it had been struggling to find food due to the harsh winter. The deaths of the 6 officers sent shockwaves through the Taiga Police Department. Colleagues mourned their loss, and local news covered the tragic event for weeks. Authorities reminded residents of the dangers of wild animals, urging caution in remote areas. Special measures were taken to prevent similar attacks, including stricter patrol protocols and improved emergency response systems. The officers' families gathered for memorial services, honoring their bravery and dedication. In the forests of Siberia, the land remained unchanged, untouched by human grief. The tragedy became another reminder of nature's power and the harsh reality of life in the wild. Early spring air in western Montana carried the damp, earthy scent of thawing soil. mingled with the sharp tang of pine. Winter had finally loosened its grip, leaving behind patches of stubborn snow nestled in the forest's hollows. The trees, tall and solemn, stretched skyward, their bare branches beginning to bud with the first signs of new life. It was the kind of crisp, bright afternoon that Jack and Mary Thompson cherished, the kind that made them feel eager to lace up their boots and disappear into the woods. For decades, the couple had roamed these forests, their bond with the land as enduring as their marriage. They had spent countless afternoons foraging, identifying edible plants, and reveling in the quiet that only deep wilderness could offer. Mushroom hunting had become a favorite pastime, a gentle yet rewarding pursuit that kept their senses sharp and their spirits youthful. That afternoon, March 25th, 2024, seemed no different from the hundreds of others before it. Jack had packed his favorite knife, the one with the worn wooden handle, while Mary carried a small wicker basket, eager to collect the first morels of the season. Their steps were slow but steady as they moved along the familiar trail, boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. The forest felt alive with possibility. Birds flitted between the branches, their calls crisp in the still air. The distant sound of a creek bubbling over smooth stones provided a rhythmic backdrop to their search. They had always known the risks of venturing into bear country, but in all their years of exploring, they had never felt threatened. What they didn't realize was that they were walking toward danger. Just ahead, beyond the thick underbrush, the grizzly bear was feeding. The powerful creature had emerged early from hibernation, its body still lean from the long winter, its hunger sharpening its instincts. It had found a deer carcass, half buried in leaves and snow, a precious meal in a time when food was scarce. Every sense was attuned to the protection of its claim, every nerve ready to defend against intruders. The Thompsons, unknowingly closing the distance, gave no indication of stopping. Jack spotted a promising patch of mushrooms near the edge of a small clearing and stepped forward to take a closer look. Mary, a few paces behind, adjusted her basket. Neither of them saw the shape in the brush, the rise and fall of massive shoulders, the flicker of movement that indicated something primal and powerful stirred. Then came the charge. The stillness was shattered in an instant. A blur of muscle and fur erupted from the undergrowth, and the ground trembled beneath the force of the oncoming beast. Jack barely had time to register the danger before the bear was upon them, a wall of raw power moving with terrifying speed. Instinct took over reason. Jack pivoted toward Mary, his only thought to shield her. His arms went up, but the bear was faster. A massive paw swiped through the air, claws slicing into his leg like razors. Pain exploded up his side as he collapsed, the ground rushing to meet him. The force of the blow sent him rolling, his breath knocked from his lungs. Mary screamed, stumbling backward, but there was nowhere to escape. The bear turned its attention to her, eyes wild with adrenaline, breathing in hot, ragged bursts. It lunged, knocking her off balance, its weight crushing down as she hit the ground hard. Claws raked across her shoulder, tearing through fabric and flesh. The shock of it sent fire through her nerves, her vision blurring with agony. The struggle was desperate, chaotic. Jack, half conscious, tried to push himself up, but his leg refused to support him. Blood seeped into the dirt beneath him, his heart pounding so violently he could hear it in his ears. He forced himself forward, dragging himself through the undergrowth. Mary writhed beneath the bear's grip, her hands flailing against its thick fur, its breath smothering her as it snarled, jaws snapping too close to her face. Then a sound, something sharp and foreign. A gunshot cracked through the trees. The bear recoiled, muscles tensing, head snapping toward the direction of the noise. Another shot followed, not a hit but a warning. The animal hesitated, nostrils flaring, weighing the sudden shift in its surroundings. Then with a deep, guttural snarl, it turned, bounding away into the forest, its massive form vanishing into the shadows as quickly as it had appeared. The silence that followed was heavy, punctuated only by ragged breathing and the rustling leaves. Jack forced himself onto his side, his vision swimming as he took in the scene. Mary lay a few feet away, her body trembling, her face streaked with dirt and pain. Blood seeped from her wounds, staining the moss beneath her. Footsteps approached, hurried, purposeful. A man emerged from the trees, rifle in hand, his eyes scanning the scene before him. The hunter, drawn by the commotion, had arrived just in time. He knelt beside Mary first, assessing the damage, then turned to Jack. Jack and Mary's injuries were severe. They needed help immediately. A call was made, though Jack barely registered it. The world blurred in and out, the pain dulling into a distant sensation, something unreal. The wait for help felt endless, but eventually, the sound of helicopter blades cut through the stillness. A rescue team arrived, moving with swift efficiency, voices calm but urgent. Jack and Mary were lifted onto stretchers, their bodies battered, their minds reeling. The flight to the hospital was a blur of movement and noise. Jack faded in and out, the rhythmic hum of the aircraft blending with the pulsing pain in his leg. Mary, beside him, clung to consciousness, her breath shallow but steady. The hands of paramedics worked quickly, bandaging wounds, monitoring vitals, their faces focused and unreadable. By the time they reached the hospital, the worst had passed. Hours of surgery followed, stitches weaving across torn skin, medications dulling the worst of the pain. The injuries were grave but not fatal. Jack's leg, though deeply lacerated, would heal with time. Mary's shoulder and back bore the brutal marks of claws, but no vital organs had been damaged. They would recover. News of the attack spread quickly. Wildlife officials tracked the bear's movements, searching for signs of further aggression. But the grizzly had vanished, retreating deep into the wilderness, following the instinct that had driven its initial attack: fear, hunger, survival. For the Thompsons, the attack was more than a brush with death. It was a stark, violent reminder that the wilderness, no matter how familiar, was never truly tame. They had always respected the land, but now they understood its raw unpredictability in a way they had never understood before. Weeks passed, and wounds turned to scars. The pain dulled, though it never fully disappeared. Their days of foraging, of wandering freely through the woods, were now over. The desire remained, but the risk was too great. They still looked out at the trees from their back porch, still listened to the wind rustling through the pines, still felt the pull of the wild. But now, there was a distance between them and the land they had once roamed without fear. The forest had given them so much over the years: peace, adventure, purpose. And in one terrible moment, it had taken something in return.